Woo! It works. Hi, everybody, and good afternoon. Well, for those of us in the afternoon, depending what time zone you're in, welcome to another episode of #EssayRead, Student Affairs Read, as part of the Essay Chat Student Affairs Collaborative. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I am coming to you live from the sunny shores of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I am thrilled to bring you back another great episode of Literature and Learning as we take things in a little bit of a different direction this time with Essay Reads. We've brought you several great books in the past, and now we've decided to start thinking about journal articles and other ways for you to get your learn on. So before we get started, a couple of quick introductions. Let's introduce our special guest, Deborah Sanborn. Deborah, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Hello, how much do you want me to say? My name is Deborah Sanborn. What did I say at orientation this morning? I am a program director in the Dean of Students office at Iowa State University. I'm also a part-time lecturer here in our School of Education. I've been with Iowa State for 19 years. Oh my gosh. I am one of the original essay chat people. Worked on that way back in 2009 when you guys were still in diapers. And I'm very excited to share some information with you about how we can talk better and help our students learn better, because they don't all learn the same.
Thanks, Deborah, and we're happy to have you here. And you may notice another face floating in the background a little bit. My good friend Joe Janice is with us today to help me out and make sure that we get your questions over in the Twitter sphere. So Joe, do you want to say hello and say a few words about yourself?
Sure. How you doing? Joe Janice. I am new and first-year student experience specialist here at Borough of Manhattan Community College. If you have the back channel going and you have any questions, look for my little face up there on Twitter, and I'll be sure to let Lisa and Deborah know what questions you have, because they'll be busy spreading the awareness and sharing the knowledge.
I shouldn't tweet at the same time.
You can try.
Multitask.
Yeah. That's right. That's a way of learning, isn't it? Multitasking. I think we'll get to that later in our questions. Nice one, Deborah.
Nice.
So Joe will be tweeting out the link to our Hangout today, so feel free to share. We're also recording this as a Google On-Air Hangout, so you can come back and join us later on to hear all the wisdom I'm sure Deborah will be sharing with us today. But as Joe mentioned, please feel free to share any questions you have for Deborah or any insights you have about the article over on the #EssayReads. So our article for this month, Building Momentum, The Unconventional Strengths of Perceiving College Students by Mercy Hicks Beckham. This is an interesting I guess, departure for us in a way. We have spent a lot of time talking about the MBTI, but we've talked about the introversion-extroversion dynamic a lot. And now with Deborah here today, we're going to move into a different set of letters, the judging and perceiving dynamic on the MBTI. So I've got a few questions for Deborah, but as we get started, as always, feel free to share your questions, insights, or answers with us. So Deborah, question number 1. The author of this article bases a lot of their arguments on what they call a conventional idea of successful study skills. How would you define this conventional ideal? What is it? Where did it come from? And why is it so well supported?
Well, Lisa, if I could for a moment, I'd like to back up and speak a little bit. Oh, wow, Joe just went unlive. That was really weird. I had Joe, and now I have not Joe. Joe still. Let me talk a little bit about the Myers-Briggs and then the 4 functions, if I can, very briefly, so I can kind of catch people up. Because if you're not familiar specifically about these, it can be a little complicated as you're trying to work through these. And so to give you an idea about the 4 different functions, we have where we get our energy from, the extroversion and the introversion. I think people really understand that, and as you suggested, we talk about that a lot when we're going back and forth on Twitter. Then we have how we take in information, and that's the sensing and the intuition, so the S or the N. And so do we like to take in a lot of very specific information, or are we someone that is a little bit more big picture focused? Third, we have the decision-making function, which is between thinking and feeling, T or F. And that is, how do we make conclusions? How do we make decisions? Are we a logical decision maker, or are we somebody that is a little bit more harmonious in our decision making, taking into consideration the feelings of others? And then finally, we have our orientation to the outer world, or judging and perceiving, which is where Mary Beckham came up with the research behind this article today. And so understanding that judging and perceiving is a little bit more complicated than just trying to figure out how people organize themselves, because it really is truly, how do we relate to the outer world? Now, those with a preference for judging, these are the folks that are very more scheduled, and they're decisive, and they like time structure, and they're folks like myself who, tend to look at things through their Outlook calendar, very specific blocks of time. whereas perceivers are the folks that are a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit more wait and see, flexible with their scheduling, like to always check out all their options. And the thing to remember behind this is the way we extrovert how we relate to the outer world, because all of us have moments where we are extroverting how we do things, and that's where the perceiving function comes from. So are we somebody that's decisive, or are we somebody that likes to explore, dislikes the routine, dislikes detailed work? And so if you think of the judging side of it as organized and structured and controlled versus the perceiving side, which is perception and more flexible and flow, you'll see how some students like to be a little bit more spontaneous in how they do the work versus folks that are really more structured and like to do things in little blocks of time. And so that's where Mary Beckham came into being with this. And so her research came behind, and this article is based on her dissertation. Her research came from long time working with students who studied the MBTI and took this MBTI during their first year orientation, and then she only surveyed students who were successful, a 2-point or above, and self-identified as perceiving students. And then began to see that, you know what, everything that's in the literature about how we're supposed to help a student be successful and that they have to do things one way, and if we look at the different first-year experience books out there, the Becoming a Master Student or the other books that we're so familiar with, we begin to see that we're telling all of these students who make up about half of our student population that they can only do it one way, and yet we have an entire population of students who are just as successful doing it their own way. And so when you look at all of those things and you figure out, if I'm going to best serve my students, that's when we begin to see that we need to look at both sides of the picture, recognize that our students are not always going to need the exact same kind of academic or personal coaching to be successful in school. So I went way, way around that, Lisa, but I think I kind of covered your question.
No, I think so, and I think it's important for us to have that background in understanding what a judging and perceiving preference is. And I really appreciated in the article that they were talking about this conventional ideal. So just to expand on that first question a little bit more, is that conventional ideal something that does show more of a judging preference? So can we equate a conventional ideal for success to judging preference strategies?
Well, I think we can. If you look at some of these texts, they talk about that to be successful in college, you have to have a planner, that you have to check your notes all the time, that you have to be on top of exactly what has to happen in a book and in your current book and know what's on your syllabus, and that you have to be a scheduler and you have to do all of these different things. And yet the participants in this research study were talking about, I don't really do planners. I write something in the first week and then I forget where I put it. And they talk about just because I have the schedule doesn't mean I put anything in it. And I think we have to recognize that just like those of us as professionals, there are different ways to do things. Now, the important thing to look at is that, okay, so we have half of our students are very organized and structured in their time and how they look at time, and then we have half of our students are not so organized, and yet overwhelmingly the majority of us who are working with these students are actually people that probably lean more towards judging, and our faculty members probably lean more towards judging, and so we have these preconceived notions that there's only one way to be successful as a college student, and it doesn't work for everyone.
And where did this conventional ideal come from? I mean, it seems fairly common, and as you were talking about, there's a lot of literature about it, a lot of the studying for success type handbooks that we use have it in there. Does that come from somewhere? Historically, is that something that's just come up?
I think it's very innate to the culture of the United States about, I think you can go even clear back to World War II, and this is how we're successful in industry, and this is how we can, build the motor companies in Detroit, and that we all have this standard of how work must be done without taking into consideration that there's a very big part of the population that doesn't see time in the same way. And so versus those boxes that are very distinct for those of us that have a judging preference and love our Outlook calendar and our Google calendar and our phones and our highlighters and all of these things, that there are folks that see time as more wibbly wobbly, and it's more of, think of a radio wave, and that it doesn't have beginning and end points. And I think our culture has really pushed us to the point where we only see one as acceptable, and that we have to step back if we're going to continue to allow students who are much more willing to speak up for themselves if we're going to help them be successful.
Well, first I must applaud you on the reference to wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff. I was waiting for that reference. I knew it was going to be in there somewhere. Dr. Deborah Sanborn.
I was trying to hold back, but
no, I knew it had to happen at some point. I'm glad it did.
It's such a great way to look at time, because
it is.
I live with 3 perceivers, and they are not me. They are not.
But that's a nice way to frame, a more gentle way to frame perhaps a different strategy for looking at time. But it leads very nicely into my second question, which is about time and a little bit about what the author talks about in relation to time. So the author talks about this concept that I liked of planned free time. She uses it in the article in relation to effective time management. Could this term also perhaps relate to our co-curricular activities? Do these activities favor the judging preference for taking advantage of our free time, or quote-unquote free time, once all other work has been completed?
I think they do. I'm not sure how it is on your campus, but on our campus it seems to me that many of the big organizers of the student festivals and the student functions and organizations, these tend to be a lot of your J preferences, the judging folks that are very comfortable with lots of blocks of time. And it's like, if you ever want to get something done, you give it to the most busy person and they take care of things. That whole concept behind there. And I think the planned free time is very conscious for those students, the ones that do live by their calendars, whereas those with a perceiving function are very comfortable to look at play before work. If I feel like I've missed out on something, I'm not going to be comfortable buckling down. I will always feel like, oh, I should have had this experience. I should have done these things. And that concept of play before work or work before play is a very big part of this judging and perceiving kind of concept.
I'm going to stop here for a minute and see if there are any questions on the hashtag. I'm looking down just to see if there is anything that comes up. Joe, do we have anything, or do you have a question?
No, I'm just trying to throw out as many quotes as I can and get the the back channel engaged. I think they're all just kind of sitting in awe right now.
Thanks,
how much
Joe.
expertise was just shared. But I'll keep you posted. I'll pop in case there's any questions.
Thanks, Joe. Trying to write down as much of the doctor's wisdom as we can. I understand.
Oh, my name is Deborah.
Deborah the doctor?
Oh, come on. We're getting inundated with them.
I know. Well, let's go on to another question that I had for Deborah when I was reading the article. Another interesting term the author uses to describe the perceiving preferences study strategy is what I like, and I've started using a bit more, even in my judging preference, functional procrastination, or something that I've taken to calling productive procrastination. Why could this be a way to be academically successful?
Again, a lot of the student success texts will mention to our students that they have to be in control of their time, and they have to learn to work ahead, and that they will find college less stressful if they do all of their assignments in a timely manner, if they pay attention to their syllabi, and if they rush to get assignments completed in the ways that these preconceived methods of how we like to get things done. Now, the perceiving student will tell you that they often have more enthusiasm for an assignment, and they do not find the stress of waiting to the last minute, or what we so-call procrastination, as stressful, because that's frequently where they find their energy. And so this notion that procrastination causes stress is more of an attitude with the perceiving student of being pressure prompted, that they do their best work after they've had time to think it through. Now remember, we talked about that the judging and perceiving and this outlook of how we relate to the outer world comes from students through extroversion. And so we might not see someone outwardly working on an assignment or actually producing a draft of a paper, but that does not mean that it's not being processed internally and that there are other things that are going on. And so pushing students that they do their best work under pressure is very, very appropriate for these students, because they realize that I feel the moment. I feel that I have the momentum, as she quotes in the article, and that this is a part of this appropriateness of procrastination for these students. This functional procrastination is very intentional. They might be processing for an entire semester before writing a final term paper. They might be procrastinating clear until midnight the night before a final exam because they feel they finally have the energy, just let's run back through this one more time. Many of these students will never proofread a paper. They write it at the last minute and it goes out the door because the energy was in that moment of writing that paper. They don't even feel the need to go back and double check it and perhaps make edits. They feel proud to be able to do these things. They like being able to walk into a test and finish it and walk out, and they don't feel that same kind of stress and anxiety as do the folks that have more of a judging preference, that are planning and working ahead for weeks and weeks to do the same kind of topic. These they don't see grades in the same way. These students are much less intentional about, oh, I have to get an A. They're more into, let me learn something here. It's not always striving for the competition side of academics. It's more that, what can I learn? What can I get out of this? And they don't find any negativism. Yes, I'm the doctor, but I can't even spit a word out with you guys. They find this rush of adrenaline is really what inspires them to do their very, very best work. So this idea that procrastination is wrong for everyone really we have to take a second look at that, and that was what Beckham was trying to encourage us to do, and was kind of in the grounded theory approach that she took to this article, because some of these students really do find that this taking of the time, this processing through, this doing my best work all at once is really the best way for them to learn and be successful as a college student.
And just to build on that, what I find interesting is it's very much a dichotomous, somewhat, and I hate to use the term black and white because I know in student affairs we like a lot of gray, but it seems like there's a lot of distinction between how perceivers work best and how those with a judging preference work best. So thinking about a lot of us in student affairs where we have to work with students who are working in groups, or even ourselves working in groups. You're a judging preference, I'm a judging preference, but as you were mentioning, you live with perceivers. I've had to work very closely with perceivers. Are there challenges and then associated tips or strategies for dealing with what seems like a really stressful dynamic with people who will work whenever they want to under pressure, and those who need those clear and defined dates and deadlines to get things done?
I think we're always going to see that. I think if you ever speak with students here on my campus, they'll talk about one of their most complicated assignments is when they're assigned group work. And if you have 4 students and they're all these above average students who are working hard and trying to get things done, and then number one, they're trying to schedule time, and they're coming up with 11 or o'clock at night or midnight, this is the only time that a group can get ready to work on a project that's 30% of their grade. And then there's the folks that kind of stretch out when they're getting things done, and that might be how somebody else needs something that's relying on a piece of this project, and you begin to see this conflict of how people like to complete tasks. One of the activities that I do with students to get them really thinking about this process is I line everyone up on a continuum. And so imagine a group of 15 or 20 individuals, and they're lined up in a straight line, and it goes across the room. And then I pick a middle point, and I ask everyone to realize, that this is one date, and then you have this axis, and you have this axis, and figure out what are the 2 things on each end. And so if this is work before play, this is play before work. And then realign themselves. And then figure out who are the people that get their work done right away and who are the people that like to play before they get their work done. And then if you assign some dates to this and you recognize, okay, so this is one day and this is another day, and if this is a month away, when are you going to get things done, when are you going to start some things, and then have people realign themselves again. And you have folks that begin to realize that we don't always start at the same time. We don't always finish at the same time. And our processes in the middle are certainly different. And to see so many different ideas as people move themselves and align themselves on how they like to get their work done, that embeds in you that, oh, when I have this group project, this might be something to consider. Now, for example, in my office, I am an ENTJ. I should have shared that right at the beginning of this program. I work with an ISTJ. Now, her S and my N are sometimes in conflict because she's very detail-oriented and wants to make the lists and get things done right away. My N is still thinking about things. And so I'm going to process a little bit longer, and then we can usually come together. But as we both have this judging preference, we know we want to get things done in advance so we can check it out, or at least cross it off our list, or, add it to the list and then cross it off just for the sake of crossing something off the list. And so if you look at these two things, we can very much work together, but we frequently, even on detail project where we have like an entire list of things that we need to get things done, I might still be thinking, and she's ready to get things crossed off the list. And so you have folks that even come into conflicts when their type preferences are very similar. And you always will see this. The person that you're planning orientation with, the person that you're working with on an academic advising project, the person that you're planning a NASPA presentation with, we work differently, and understanding those things is a great way. So ask those questions at the beginning. Okay, are you the kind of person that likes to work ahead, or would you rather think about things more and then help us more at the end? And having these conversations ahead of time and encouraging our students to have these conversations when they're in group work ahead of time really can help that work situation. It certainly works for those of us that are in student affairs and working with very different personalities on a daily basis as well.
Awesome. I'm trying to write down strategies and thinking back to the time where I had to work with a card-carrying member of the perceiver preference and how we did come into a lot of conflict, but having to think about this is how you work, and the work got done, it just got done in a very different way. It's almost process versus product a little bit, and what needs to happen to get to that point. So I wanted to go back into a little bit of that wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, because what I really like in this article is how Beckham talked a lot about different conceptions of time. And that's one thing I know we all struggle with in student affairs and just as people, thinking about time, how quickly it's passing, how much we have, how much we don't have. And the judging and perceiving preference seem to think about time in very different ways. How we understand it, how we view it, how we manage it. So how is time seen and used differently between those with a judging and perceiving preference?
Time is seen as blocks of time, and frequently those of us with the judging perception are very concrete, and we know exactly what time is comprised of. We even go so far as to know that there's 60 minutes in the hour, and all of these different things, and it can come into quite a conflict with those that really have no concept of this. For example, in my house, I perhaps have a individual with a perceiving preference who recognizes that there is times that we have to get up and prepare ourselves for the day and actually get out the door at a certain time. But as to any realization of the actual time of day, that does not even occur. And I'm of the kind of the situation where it's like I know exactly what time I need to get up and what time I need to take a shower and what time I need to iron my khakis, because the student affairs khakis, and to know these different kinds of things as we look at that. And so understanding that there's these whole different time capsules as we go through that, that's a big part of how this works together. If you hold a second, I had a note that I wanted to refer to. I was thinking about the time and the momentum, and it comes down to the perception that is time getting away from me, or is time more fluid? And if time is not fixed, then can I use this at any time? And whereas I see as time as something that has to be managed, I know exactly what I can get completed and accomplish in one day. Those with the perceiving preference are not going to really look at the quantity of time as that way. They don't see it as increasing or decreasing or getting shorter. It's just there, and it's not really something that has to be managed. Specifically understanding how things have to be all done at once, this isn't going to be a concept that the perceiving student will understand. They think it's nice to, look at times of frame, and it just doesn't mean by any means that the person with a perceiving preference is going to be late for meetings or turn in assignments late. Those aren't the kinds of things that we're looking at, but that there's this whole continuity of flow that they're really looking for. And it's this how they use time, and then it's okay, it's now the moment when I have to work on this assignment because I've given it the most thought and I recognize that it is eventually going to be due here probably in the next 24 hours, and then they get into this is all my energy and this is all going to this, and then if we interrupt that by saying, do you have this done yet? Have you done this yet? Do you have this completed? If we call them, if we send an email to check up on things, we are frequently interrupting where all of this momentum and this big building up of the energy can go to. And so we have to be cognizant of that as we work through these different times and recognize the implications for how we use it in our practice as we do our best to coach our students to be successful.
Great, thank you. Joe, any questions, comments, further Doctor Who references on the back channel?
Let's see. We have Paula, who thanks Deborah for her timey-wimey reference from your fellow Whovian.
Oh, nice.
And just people are appreciating the language and the pretty much the ease of understanding the way you're explaining it is what I'm gathering so far. And I'm trying to fit it all into 140 characters. And I'm just telling people to watch in case I get it wrong. That's it for now. No major questions. Everybody's just kind of watching and enjoying.
Okay.
Well,
watching and enjoying. I feel like we should be juggling or something. Some more stuff on the time stuff.
Yeah.
You know, so much of what the text that we were talking about, and I don't mean to pick on the Ellis text or pick on anything by, you know, like Gardner and Dooler. These are some of my favorite people, and they were really a part of this. And I think I kind of the thought that I was holding on to, because Lisa's grilling me and it gets really nerve-wracking here in a little bit. I was a student of type and understood my own preferences for a very, very long time. I was probably a student of type for 10, 12 years before I decided to go ahead and pursue my own type education and actually become a type practitioner. And the thing that I try to make up for now is that I knew one way to be successful in college, and that was with my planner and highlighting assignments. And, you know, actually I was doing this before electronic planners were an option, and that you had to make a list and you had to do all of these things and check things twice and work through this. And I was the kind of person that was pushing this with my students for a very, very long time. If you don't have the time to do it right, why are you here? You know, these are the kinds of things you have to do to be successful. And understanding my own type preferences and understanding my own judging privileges, so, you know, as you might want to call it, and recognizing, wow, there are so many people that can do it differently. I have this history of, I seem to always hire, without knowing their type, ENFP graduate students, and I think that it's because they represent something that I generally don't have to offer, and I'm always looking to build, okay, what am I missing, what can be a part of this team? And so I've ended up, and it's just kind of a joke around here because I've had this long stream of ENFP graduate students, and some of these people are absolutely brilliant. You know, they were on the dean's list, they're 395 grade points, and they are of the same type preference that was actually in my dissertation and doing research of folks that struggle the most academically. But then at that same time, of that group of people that struggle the most that I found in my research, there was the other half of the group that were always really, really successful. And so these were the people that maybe figured it out and figured out how to make their own concept of what time is work for them, and then some folks are still in transition. And understanding this group of folks that are in transition is what we need to do earlier so we can help these people connect and kind of do that. And if you think about, oh, I don't know, some of the literature will talk about your key to time management is that you have to be able to complete all of your responsibilities, and you do this list and you go through things. But then you have a student that tells me, well, I just like doing this for myself, and I'll get from this whatever I put into that, and everything always gets done. And then we have this habit of making that seem like that's not the dedicated student. And we have to get beyond that and recognize that we are not always going to have the best comparisons for time management or know the best way for every student to practice good time management to be successful.
Absolutely. And I was peeking on the hashtag a little bit, and I wanted to go back into the language a little bit more and some of the terms you were using, particularly around things like momentum and flow.
Okay.
So we talked about that. It's in the article, talking about how perceiving students often find themselves in a space or a place of flow, encouraging that momentum and enjoying that momentum, and frankly looking for that momentum in order to get things done. And I have noticed even in myself with a judging preference, I do find sometimes it's easier for me to work on certain things when I'm in flow, or I may stumble into flow when I'm on stage giving a presentation and then come out of that and wonder what happened. And now Joe and I have talked about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to momentum and flow, I think one thing someone was saying in the article, I think it was actually our good friend Nikki Rudolph, was talking about sometimes that flow is very internal or hidden, and it doesn't often look like work because we can't see it as being something productive, or it doesn't happen at a time where we think it's supposed to happen. So how can we recognize and encourage space for this momentum and flow for good work to happen?
I think it's a bit of a sea change on our part, and understanding and giving space to students and ourselves, or the folks in our lives that are perceivers, for understanding the how time doesn't always have to be controlled for us to do our best work. If we think, for those who are in essay grad or essay doc kind of mode, and how you're encouraged to do free writing and just kind of get in the practice of writing and pick any topic and begin expanding on what do you know about this and getting into that. That's probably the best example that I can give for getting into the flow. And to know that I had a very successful colleague who just completed her essay grad here at Iowa State, and to know that this person was doing their capstone paper, and I'm like on Friday going, wow, you about done? It feels pretty good. I'll take a look at it if you want, knowing that they're presenting a big paper on Monday. Oh, I haven't written it yet. And my tendency is like, you know, there's like not enough oxygen in the room. And to know that someone can sit down and do that, and I marvel at this, and I begin to think about all of the great accomplishments the great thinkers, you know, the Einsteins that are out there, the people that have really come up with the things that make our lives work, the Steve Jobs kind of people. I would imagine that these are folks that really had to get in flow and allow the topics to expand, and to recognize that our preconceived notions of what is acceptable time management and what is an acceptable way to get a project done is not always the best. An example would be yesterday we were on the folks, 16 different units, Dean of Students Office, big university here. We were hit with an assignment that we had to give like considerable amount of feedback, and we had to do it in like a 2-hour time frame. And it's like, how am I supposed to do good work and give you really good feedback if this is all the time that I have? And even though I'm somebody that likes to do things in blocks of work, I do like to think things through, and recognizing how to respond to that, and then perhaps that that this breaking down into small tasks and this pattern of work things is not always the best thing. I would imagine that somebody not like me is like, oh yes, I can just spur that off at the last moment. I needed to think it through, and then I wanted to break it down into smaller parts and wish I'd had 2 or 3 days to work on it versus 2 hours.
And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that, and maybe outside of type education a little bit, but I wanted to pick up on, and selfishly pick up on this a little bit because of our current Essay Chat blog series on failure and failing forward. But the whole idea of, you had mentioned a little bit around good work and what counts as work that's done well, and what success might mean, and by consequence what failure might mean in relation to how we work as perceiving preferences or judging preferences. Can you talk a little bit more about what good work looks like, or should look like, or can look like, depending on the preference?
The students in Beckham's study overwhelmingly said, this was, it ended up with 19 students that she actually ended up working with. They overwhelmingly said that the grade was not their ultimate goal. And I can't remember a time in any of my degree programs or whenever that I was not working for the grade. And I was trying to use this as a reference actually this morning when I was speaking with 200 parents at an orientation program, and to think about encouraging students to take risks. Maybe if we get so less focused on, oh, this is a class I can get an A in, versus the class I might get a C in, but I might really learn something, and I might really challenge myself to do even more, and really learn something, and that we get so focused on this end game instead of the process. And I think that's where many of our perceiving students and colleagues are, is that it's more about the process than the end game, and that's okay, and that's actually a very good thing.
You're speaking my language, Dr. Sanborn. Speaking my, or Deborah. Speaking my language. I have a couple more questions, but I figured, Joe, I'll hop over to you one more time just to see if there's anything else going on in the back channel before I get a bit more wisdom out of Deborah.
Go for the wisdom.
All right, going for the wisdom. You want to flex your fingers a little bit because this might get good.
Okay.
So I wanted to back up a little bit farther because you've talked about type education and you talked about your type education. And from what I know about you, I know your doctorate was in and around type education. So for those who might be interested in learning more about type or MBTI, maybe from a beginner's lens, are there resources or other places you would recommend? And I'm also curious as to what you mean by type education.
When I think of type education, I think of becoming a qualified or certified individual who is able to this is a psychological assessment. If you're looking into the field of psychometrics, 20, 30 years ago, the MBTI could only be provided by a psychiatrist or psychologist, somebody with a PhD. And it became more open, but there still had to be certain kinds of qualifications. It's like, you know, the people that administer the ACT, we have to know that they have a little bit of understanding of assessments and things before we're going to allow these people to write the questions for the ACT. And so even with becoming certified in type, yes, you can take all of those free, you know, different things and, oh, look, I'm a dolphin, and that matches my ENFP, and those are great, and they're kind of fun, and I actually use those in a lot of my presentations because they help kind of ground it. This is a psychological assessment, and understanding the role behind it is a lot of concentrated research, and it's been around for quite some time. So it has, you know, it has its pros and it has its cons. There's other assessments that I also like, but as Lisa can tell you, when you actually go to study, you get a book like this thick, and you have to actually take a comprehensive exam and a practical exam in order to be an individual that just can purchase the MBTI and then self-assess these. Because I believed in this, because I had a mentor in type here at Iowa State University who actually then turned into my major professor when I was doing my doctoral work, someone who has worked with this quite extensively in the field of education and also in diversity and counseling, that, you know, I needed to take that extra effort if I wanted to go into the great depth to help students learn this. And my biggest area where I like to work with type is in understanding learning styles, because I saw very, very early on the impetus, which then later became my doctoral research, is that there are a great number of students that are coming into our research university who seem to have all of the qualifications to be successful, but they're somehow not turning on that switch of their learning style and then translating that into being successful while they're here. And knowing that they have all of this background and they've got the test scores and they've got the core requirements from high school and they seem to have everything going for them to be successful, what is not happening? And obviously there's a million other things that can help a student be successful, but then I knew that I could make a difference in my work with helping students understanding learning styles. And anything about type is something you already know about yourself. And so you can take the qualifications and go through CPP, which is Consulting Psychologist Press. Didn't you go with OKA? Who'd you go with, Lisa, for your training?
Psychometrics.
Psychometrics, oh, Psychometrics Canada. There's many throughout there. You can connect with Lisa or I. There is the Step 1, which is the basic MBTI, the 4-letter type code. You can then have additional training to do the Step 2, which is my favorite. I love the Step 2 because it goes into the 5 facets below each of the 4 type code or letters that you come up with. And there's so much more in depth to that when you start thinking about, oh, well, this is an ESTJ and another ESTJ, and they don't seem to act alike at all. And you can learn all of the processes that are even below that as you really dig down. There's going to be pros and cons to any one of these, but I think it's all about self-understanding, and I particularly like the positive language of the Myers-Briggs, that it's helping us understand differences, such as understanding how judges work and how perceivers work. It's really allowing us to focus on those differences with positive language, and that by understanding how we do work differently, and that's okay, and making that a positive and good thing, and seeing what we can learn out of the situation, versus thinking, well, I just can't work like that, and that's not what it's for. So it's for team building, and it's for building up an understanding of self, and it's for figuring out what's your next step and where do you want to be. If you're thinking about, what are your goals and what's your next step in student affairs, or as a student, if you're thinking about where you want to be and what kind of grade point, and are you going on to graduate school, you think about all of these different things and where's the next step. Understanding self, I think, is the big beginning of that. In addition to MBTI, I am EQI certified, EQI 2.0. So I work with that a little bit. It's pretty pricey for those of us in higher ed. I can make budgets work with MBTI, but EQI is kind of expensive. I love emotional intelligence, particularly how it relates to type, but I think it's very, very difficult to do that. You can follow APT INTL, so it's APT International. The Association of Psychological Type. It's an organization that I've worked with for quite some time. Actually was on their board for quite a few years. And they are a global network of folks that work in type. They have a biannual conference, plus tons and tons of really inexpensive, like $6, $20, kind of webinars where you can continue your type education. And there's so many of them that are put out by CPP also, so follow CPP on Twitter and Facebook and all of those places as well, or just connect with me and you can kind of see where all my type stuff is. But lots of stuff related to what we do in education and how we like to advance others. And for those of us that are with us that are colleagues in career services and helping students find their way, I think there's a lot about type all throughout everything that we do in student affairs. I know it helps me work better with others. I know it helps me understand my students more effectively. And I have just found it just kind of a fun personal area to have some expertise. I think it's really funny that my son will have, like a type head. He's very proud of his ENFP, and he puts it on his door so everyone can see what his specific kinds of type areas are.
And Deborah was actually the one who turned me on to my Myers-Briggs certification. So I'm Myers-Briggs certified Step 1 and Step 2, yes, from Psychometrics Canada. And I did the 4-day intensive, let's dig as deeply as we can into Myers-Briggs, into type. And when you go into this sort of training, you learn everything from where Myers-Briggs came from, so who Myers is and who Briggs is. There's a fun lesson on stats that knocked me over a little bit, but I was able to get the gist of it. As well as really learning for me, which was interesting. It's a very meta type of training because you learn about yourself in order to learn about others. So having that vocabulary for me and being able to understand what that means and then to translate that back to our students. So when I did the MBTI certification, I immediately turned it into a leadership summit that I did at my last institution where we spent a lot of time dispelling the myths around the language of type. So yes. Just as Deborah was talking about judging and perceiving, it was also interesting to see what students thought extroversion meant and what introversion meant. And we talked about this in one of our last Essay Reads chats. So there's a great opportunity there just to distill the language. Anyone who knows me knows I always ask, what does that mean? And what does that language mean? And what do you mean by that? So being able to think through that language and then to have a vocabulary and a language to talk about yourself and others is really fascinating. Just as Deborah was saying, to be able to give voice to, I just do it this way because, but here's why I do this, which is fascinating. So
exactly.
All thanks to you.
No, there was a big type community going on, but I love that I maybe sparked an interest in you, Lisa. Also think about strengths. I completely forgot that I'm strength certified, but I love some of the language of strengths, and I think it's really a lot of fun. It's actually, if you visited my office or any of the offices in our unit, you would see that on our little door signs we have our type preferences and we also have our top 5 strengths. And so walking in that you're going to, what you're going to be encountering. And again, it's all for me about the self-knowledge. If I'm encountering a new individual, I don't walk up and say, what's your type, unless I happen to be at a type conference. That's not where I am, and I know I get very pigeonholed over to type because I'm comfortable talking about it and happy to be the champion of Twitter on type, particularly in student affairs. But what I do is I like to understand self. So if I'm encountering a new individual, I can have a conversation and kind of figure out where they are. And probably if I get to know somebody for about 5 minutes, I'm going to know a little bit about them, and then maybe how they're responding to me. I might make some assumptions about their type preferences, and I might adjust myself so that I can allow this person to be more comfortable and then give them time to be a little bit more into the conversation and recognize, like sometimes I need to turn down my extroversion because I can kind of bowl people over. Imagine that would ever happen if you've ever met me at a conference. But it's about, for me, the understanding of self so that I can make it a better place for other people that I'm around, and I really like to see it that way. And yes, going back to the history of type, it's incredibly fascinating. As with most different kinds of assessments, there's criticism, and then there's a lot of awards and accolades for things, but you have to take it for what it is. Can you use this and learn something about yourself? Can you use this and learn something to help your students be more effective? Okay, well, that's a big part of my mission, so that's why I'm going to take it.
So I'm just thinking about turning down extroversion and how much that resonates with me and having to really work the dial. Conferences are bad for that, though. I mean, an extrovert who gets energy from other people and is surrounded by other people, it's a recipe for a lot of extroversion.
Oh, I know. And then we're just about ready to implode. Oh, my God.
Yeah. We're just the most happy people there all the time. There's no off switch. So Deborah and I need to go to a conference together.
I know. Exactly.
So I just had a couple more quick questions because time flies when we're having fun talking about type. But I'm curious about research again, and you mentioned our essay grad and our essay doc friends, and there's a lot of great research that's still available and waiting to come out of this type of work. I know the author noted several different opportunities for research. I'm looking at my notes. For example, just exploring the nature of perceiving itself and what perceiving means, and how this preference might interact with some of those other types that you talked about, sensing, intuition, maybe even thinking and feeling, especially extroversion, introversion. So for our essay grad and essay doc students, what might this research look like? Are there certain resources or authors they should be looking at? And for someone who might be thinking about a research project, could you suggest some potential research questions they might want to explore?
Oh, there's so many. Well, number one, this was a qualitative dissertation and a qualitative article, and it was about 19 specific students. I would want to see specifically, because I'm a quantitative researcher, I would want to see more going to the side of exactly what kinds of grades, what kind of academic. I believe in the original dissertation, I don't think this was in the article, or it might have been in the article, after she got to these 19 students, I believe their grade points ranged from about a 2.3 to a 3.2 in there, and I would want to see a larger population and what kinds of grades do you put on a full spectrum of students who are successful with this. And for example, in my research, I had a lot of focus on the perceiving students, but it was on the students who were not academically successful, whose entry data shows they should have been able to be successful in the first semester. So it's definitely an area that needs to be expanded. A larger population, and then adding some of the qualitative areas for the researches as well there. So an area that's great for looking up on anything on learning styles. There's close relations to Kolb and the different kind of work that you'll see in any kind of the learning styles things. And then the Journal of Psychological Type. This is a journal that you get an automatic subscription to if you're part of the Association for Psychological Type. But anyone can, I believe, subscribe to the Journal of Psychological Type, and you can quite find it through a lot of different things. That's where you're going to see a lot of these research articles. Anytime that you're looking for doing a key search for psychological type and learning style, there's a lot of different ones. I've seen some really cool articles that I used on there's already been some on type in social media, on type in technology, different kinds of students. If you go to some of the technology journals, I think there's been a lot related to psychological type and students in technology fields. And type theory tells us that you're going to find a little bit of the type preferences in all the different areas. But I think specifically looking to build on the population, look more closely at learning styles, and then see if we're kind of finding these differences. Like if you flip it over and you look at the judging students that have more of that preference, I think there's a lot more work that can be done to show where their success is as well, because they seem to be the with it ones. When we're looking externally, these are the people that are organized and they have all their ducks in a row, and yet they're not always successful as well. And so expanding this same kind of research, making comparison to the literature for like the student success literature and the master student and those different kinds of things, and saying, there might be another way that we can do this. Lisa, we could brainstorm forever on different
I
areas.
know, I'm already writing down, I'm going to do this research topic and this one, and Deborah and I are going to write about this. And
Okay, we're totally going to present at a conference on this soon.
Absolutely.
You know, the whole Canadian Iowa thing going, and
I'm happy to bring the international diversity and perspective into it. Not a problem.
as long as you bring those little maple candies too, because I like those.
Yeah, of course. Anything to bribe you to work with me, I'm happy to do it.
Oh, okay. Not a problem.
But I also appreciate the judging. We can look like we're with it, and someone with a strong judging preference, we're not always with it. That's a great facade. We're not even close to with it sometimes. I'll tell you that much.
No kidding. And the other thing that really kind of, I've been on these faculty panels all throughout orientation for the last week, and to hear faculty joking with parents about, about our students that procrastinate, and like there's only one way to do this. And I think there has to be something in the teaching literature and in the when you think about the learning of teaching, that we need to be more accepting of all the students in the classroom and recognize that there's not just one perfect way to do it to reach out to all students. And that's really hard to see from my lens sometimes, like, I'm the judger, this is the way I'm going to keep my calendars and all of my color-coded different things on my dry erase board, and helping others to recognize that there's better ways and more ways that we can do this to help more students be successful.
I think that's a bit of a call to action there, SA Chat and SA Reads friends. Just
You're
saying.
on it.
So before we wrap up, Joe, any other comments, questions, anything? How are your fingers doing? Were you able to capture all of that awesomeness that Deborah was talking about? It's a lot of work, and I appreciate you.
I'm just trying to tell people to come watch the video. I can't sum it up in 140 characters, but somebody did mention, I put the question out there, if people use StrengthsQuest or if they have used MBTI, and somebody mentioned True Colors, and they liked it because it was very simple. Now,
Yes.
how does True Colors, I guess the question would be, how does that relate to MBTI? Is it just a more, I don't want to say watered down, but is it an easier to understand version of psychometrics?
No, it's based in type theory, as is strengths. If for anybody that's ever been through type training and then goes to strengths training, you'll see that, oh, this kind of seems familiar. So we're all coming from the same aspects of understanding parts of self. True Colors and strengths both go a little bit more to traits, and type is going to go a little bit more to our innate self and how we just kind of act without thinking. Think about, oh, if I cross my hands this way, but then I have to consciously think if I'm going to move my thumb this way and put the other thumb on top. And some of those are a little bit more trait-based versus type-based. But they all get us thinking and using positive language to find differences. And so I think, depending on what your budget is, if that's what you have, but I think for, Lisa, what do you guys do through psychometrics? $15 a student, you can do some really cool stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really just you're paying for each student to complete the assessment. So around 15-ish bucks. And I mean, you can get a discount, a bulk discount, depending on how many students you have, too. So it can be quite economical depending on what you're hoping to do.
The other question I had was, what were some of the other resources that you were sharing? I was able to, Google and track down the Journal of Psychological Type. What were the other ones?
I will need to get you a list. I think that's something that we can follow up with. I would try to come up with some of the best journals that I have used where you're going to see a lot of these. A lot of them are going to be in psychology and different kind of psychometrics and assessment. But right now the names are escaping me, and I'm like, oh.
That's all right. Yeah, I think it would be great for us to be able to share that with the article as a wrap-up, Lisa, or
Read the
we'll figure out a way to get it out there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe.
No problem.
And thanks, Joe, for writing down all the wisdom that was happening. I was just busy basking in it, so I appreciate having someone recording it.
I try, but it's better off for people to watch the video. At some point, I stopped typing. It was just like, I want to listen to this. I don't want to type it at the same time.
Well, luckily, it's being recorded, so you get to do both.
Absolutely.
So, Deborah, before we wrap up, this sounds like an SA Chat now, any final thoughts, anything else you'd like to share with us that we didn't get to today?
I have so many, Lisa. I think this is something that we could talk about for, we could have an entire Type in Student Affairs channel. I think I'd probably have to just throw out my favorite Carl Jung quote. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And think about how we can understand differences and how we can understand the differences of how our students learn. help them be more effective, and help them be successful students.
I hope Joe's writing that one down because that one was good. I just was blown back a little bit by that one, but I like that a lot. You got that, Joe? All right. Well, thank you very much, Deborah. I appreciate you taking time out of what I know is a busy schedule for you, and I know as a judging preference it was right there on your Outlook calendar, so we appreciate you popping in and sharing your wisdom with us today. So SA Reads, of course, we have our monthly web chats, but the conversation continues, as always, on Twitter. So please join us over on #SAReads. There's a lot of great wisdom that Deborah has shared that Joe has written down for us, so please continue to engage in the conversation. Deborah will always be on Twitter to share with you as well, and as Deborah and Joe mentioned, we're going to put together a list of resources and other places where you may want to find more information, and we'll tweet that out along with another link to the article so you can read a bit more about what we're talking about. If you have any suggestions for an upcoming SA Reads conversation, if there's a book, and now, of course, we're talking about articles, so magazine articles, journal articles, web-based articles, anything that you want to talk about, please tweet them to me or my good friend Kristen. We're both on the SA Reads hashtag as well, so we can hear your suggestions and get ready for a summer full of more reading and learning. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Joe. And we'll see you on the hashtag and see you on Twitter. Bye, everybody.
Bye.